All right, welcome to a special inauguration edition of New Wine Table Talks. And we are stoked that you are joining us today, Wednesday. So, for those of you that are normally joining in with us on Thursdays, we thank you for starting a day early. And also, just a programming note because of the inauguration episode today, we won't be starting tomorrow or having the table talks, the normal Thursday table talks. That will start up again or take up again next week. But this week, we're excited for today's table talks. We're excited to be joined by our colleagues for this edition and directly related to the inauguration. And so, depending on where you've been, maybe you don't even notice that there's a big hubbub going on today, and that's awesome because you've been focused on the things in front of you. For those of us that have been paying attention to the news reels and the updates and everything, today was historic for a number of different reasons. And so we just wanted to engage this topic because for many of us, now there's a question of, okay, so now what? And it's not just political. It deals with COVID-19. It deals with our relational issues and the relational truth. And so much so that we see how the new year has begun with a lot of questions. And so today's episode titled Inaugurated Expectations, Hopes, and Fears. And we want to just take some time just to pause and ask the questions and to dialogue about this and see where we're at. And that's what New Wine Table Talks is all about. So for those of you that have been here before, you know that if you just go right up there on the upper side right there for the Facebook page and hit like, that way when New Wine does other events or engages in other videos and they're posted on our Facebook page, you'll be informed. And then you can join New Wine in what we're trying to do. And that's build relational bridges in contemporary culture through Jesus Christ. And so we're stoked that you're here with us today. Paul, inaugurated expectations, hopes, and fears. That's a big topic. So what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I'll be doing most of the question asking, so you all will be doing the heavy lifting. And just as Matt had shared, inaugurated expectations, hopes, and fears. No matter where you are on the political, ideological, cultural spectrum, it's quite likely that you, like the rest of us, have expectations, hopes, and fears. And we're going to be trying to get at those in a variety of ways. My colleagues here come from different cultural backdrops, from different parts of the region and the country. And so while we're here in the Pacific Northwest, not everyone else is who's on this call, but Trudy Sang, Cliff Chappell, Kayla Farlow, Matt Farlow, Tony Nguyen, Jeremy Chen, Heather Timmons, Bill Peterson, CJ Young, thank you for joining us as you'll be reflecting both in terms of your thoughts and also people in your community. What are you hearing from others as we have these transitions? One presidency from one to the other, and all that goes on with that. Are our hopes and our fears and our expectations realistic? Are we cynics? Are we overly optimistic? How are we processing what's going on with President Trump leaving office, President Biden coming into office, all that's bound up with that in our communities? And how do our expectations, hopes, and fears shape our relationships with others? So many churches are divided on politics. So many churches are divided on matters of ideology and cultural concerns and questions today. And we're all familiar with that to one extent or another. And so in the midst of it all, we will also consider the following. Jesus' disciples had all kinds of expectations for him. I often have expectations of Jesus, perhaps even wrongful expectations of him. And some of their expectations, his disciples' expectations, were dashed and crushed with his crucifixion and even his ascension when he ascended to heaven. They were still saying, are you now going to, restore the kingdom to Israel? And he said, ultimately, and the angels with him, it's like in God's time, not in a passive way, but in God's way. Jesus did not come to conquer Rome. He came to conquer hearts and to transform society through his kingdom community, the church, first and foremost. But what kind of change needs to occur in my heart today and in our hearts today as we deal with our own expectations of Jesus and of our culture, the church, society at large, our hopes and fears? So, with that said, I don't think we're going to soon forget this election cycle, and for a variety of reasons. The remembrance of it will likely recycle a lot of strong emotions for many people, no matter where we stand politically. And so I want to ask my colleagues here, what are some of the hopes and fears that you have and others around you have in your communities, both politically, culturally, spiritually, etc., right now at this given time? If you could share, and just feel free to share however you see fit, those on the call, this Brady Bunch call right now. So, anyone want to start? Take the plunge. Thank you, CJ. Yes, please start.
I figured I talked too much, so I wasn't going to start. No, I was just going to say, even today, it's been interesting navigating all the different meetings. It's in the back of everyone's head what's going on and what our hopes, what our fears, what our worries are. Fear has been a topic for the last few days, especially. Like I've heard from, I pastor a church up in Port Orchard, Washington, across the water from Seattle. We have a diverse population of people, politically and culturally in some ways. And I think there's been a lot of fear from both sides, the fear of the new administration, fear of what the old administration was and the damage done, what's going to happen. And then honestly, like the themes, listening this morning to the speeches given, they're really well done. They were beautiful. I love the themes of unity, but those are great ideals. But I guess for me, some hopes I have is that we would find ways to build bridges. However, the practicality of that and how we do that and how we navigate those waters is, I don't know if I'd so go as far as say it's a fear of mine, but it's a real concern that I have. Is like, how do we build these bridges in our church communities, value one another, listen to one another's ideals, get to the heart of issues and why we stand where we stand. For people that are questioning ideologies they've had in the past, how do they get to navigate those waters in the community of faith and with in their just communities, like churches and individual relationships? I know in my family, there's a diverse opinions politically, and how do we navigate those waters in this new culture, this new under new leadership? So I don't know, there's a lot of unknowns. And while I do appreciate, I think today was definitely a day for ideals and for setting the bar high and expectations and giving hope. And I thought that was great. But the pragmatist in me is wondering, okay, so on the interpersonal connections and interpersonal conversations and in church communities and in local cities and town communities, what does that look like? How does that get navigated? How do we lovingly, humbly have those conversations and navigate these waters? They're different waters now, and in one day, it's just a different water from yesterday to today, I think. And in the conversations I've had, that's what I've experienced. So those are some of mine.
Thank you, CJ. Thank you very much. And maybe we'll talk more as we proceed about some practical suggestions on how to build those bridges and the like in our conversations. Has anyone come across concerns that maybe you or others watched, listened today, and maybe were not as taken with hopes and ideals, but maybe concern, or of people who are saying, I don't buy any of this, and didn't feel that? Anyone want to share from that vantage? Because we really want to make this as open as possible so that people's emotions across the spectrum and concerns can at least be articulated through all of us here today as much as possible.
Yeah, I'll say I without mentioning who, I know some people who are who are very afraid of a Biden administration, and so even to experience that inauguration, it's probably very similar to the flip side, experiencing a Trump inauguration, right? What that would have felt like, and I can't help but think about how the narratives, the stories that were shaped in shape what we're able to see, and the same situation, what we notice, what jumps out at us, right? For some of my friends, it'd be, wow, this is the first time, Black woman, is up there in that way. Wow, it's amazing. And for others, that's not even, yeah, it's totally a different way of seeing that moment, right? And maybe just taking a stab at kind of potential ways, jumping ahead a little bit, Paul, about ways that we can consider how to sort of maybe more than even just building bridges, but like walk alongside each other, maybe. I think because we have such different narratives, one thought that I've had is we really need to engage each other's narratives. And if it's a long, slow work, we have to really understand how each other's understanding history. What are you reading? What books? What perspectives? I think it was yesterday that the 1776 commission, I think it was the report, which was a Trump effort to re-engage, kind of having a patriotic understanding of U.S. history. And so I was able to read that, and I found it really interesting, and it was very illuminating, eye-opening. It wasn't necessarily surprising, but just the perspective on U.S. history was very different from the one, or say different emphases. It's not that I haven't learned that way of seeing things, but different emphases than I would currently articulate myself. And I think about if we're not able to see the same reality with any level of resonating because we're living in different stories, I think that will not move us forward well. So I think that even just making efforts to have intentional, I don't know, book clubs, something, right? Intentional ways for us to inhabit the narratives that we think shape the significance of this moment.
I think, I personally, I have concerns. When it comes to leadership, I always have concerns, but my concern though is as the new president comes in, that we don't hitch everything to this administration as if, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are going to be the savior that the nation needs, as if a political party can offer something. And so my concern is we don't see this kind of flip where the one side, and I'm talking people of faith, Christians who are they swing more towards the Democrat side, will try to demonize Trump and what he's done. And then those who swing more towards the Republican side will try to elevate what he did as being very messianic. And then now that Biden's in, is going to be the destruction of that. And so where Christians then get caught up in the political language games, as opposed to stepping back and going, oh, wait, because I found it interesting that before the election, one of the things that Biden's camp was highlighting was that he was going to be the first active Catholic. And for a nation that is very, that wants to highlight sometimes its religion, I found it interesting that I didn't hear as much today about that religious push. And yet throughout the debates for the Democrats, one of the big things is that, but we're religious too, and we believe in God. And yet all of a sudden they come into the presidency. And so now that seemed to be pushed to the side a little bit, so I do have some concerns as far as like, what does it do for the religious hole there, that gap there? We had a religious right. Is there a religious left? So I do have some questions as far as like, will religion or the truth of God still be front and center? Not saying that it was done appropriately during a Republican presidency, but there tends to be much more of an intentional push when there is a Republican president, will that continue with a Democratic president who did want to highlight his Catholicism, or at least those people around him? So I do have some concern about that. What will happen to religion, or the public market discussion of religion?
Yeah, good questions, Matt. Thank you, and Jeremy as well. The reflections on diverse book clubs, reading books that not everyone agrees on, but to understand one another's stories, and then again, how does religion play itself out in public life in the marketplace of ideas? Other thoughts in terms of concerns from your own communities and the like. Cliff, Heather, others, please.
I have a sense of relief. And when I faced today and saw the things that went on with the inauguration and the speeches, I had a sense of hope. And the thing that I think gives me some hope is going back and looking at thinking about just the concept of Black Lives Matter. I feel like I really matter. Whereas before, I was ostracized, demonized, and I feel like that has changed or is changing. I know that there's not, there's a lot of work to be done. There's a long way to go, but I'm hopeful. When I saw what was happening in the summer with the marches, I know that there was that faction that got in there and attempted to derail what was happening with the recognition of Black Lives Matter. But then that somewhat died down. And I'm hoping that will be resurrected now. My concern is that there is still that group out there that would do people like me harm if they had a chance. And that is concerning to me. I still have to watch my back. People in my congregation, I express to them to be situationally aware when they go out, know where they go, when they go. Don't just go blindly, but be cognizant of their surroundings and who is around them. My family, my grandchildren, these are all concerns of mine. And, just for their safety, because I know that there are people out there that have been radicalized and would not give a second thought of hurting or harming a Black person. But I do have hope that things are changing, and I'm just not, as they say, holding my breath, but moving to the future with that sense of hope and relief.
And Cliff, thank you very much for your open-hearted reflection in that regard. Recently, you and I were engaged with a community of, business leaders, lawyers, others, talking about the racialized spectrum. And we had no idea how they voted. I think there were some conservatives, more liberally minded types, but one of the things I appreciated about the group in response, I think they'd been growing into this slowly over several years, is that regardless of where they were on the political spectrum, I think they were really, and there was a sign of hope with that, they were really thinking, wow, I need to hear more of this. I had no idea. Maybe they didn't have much exposure. And I think, so regardless of how we vote, because I think people's walls go up so quickly on wherever we're coming from, I would just hope that everyone can kind of hit the pause button on the cancel or the confirmation bias and say, help me understand more. Maybe I need to listen more. Maybe I need to enter in further to the book club idea and what people's stories and narratives are. There are all kinds of narratives and stories, and that is an important story that we need to account for and listen into and press into. And people who have other fears and concerns as well. And so, not to make all cats gray and to say it's all one and the same, but to really try and enter in with a deep sense of empathy and understanding, and to be inquisitive. And that's what I appreciate about those guys. Thank you, Cliff. And perhaps we'll be coming back to that theme as well this afternoon. Others, what are you hearing? What are you feeling?
That in listening to the speeches today and the visuals and the pictures that happened, it was hopeful, and it did present some hopefulness. I think even just, I mean, as a woman, it was very inspiring, and to see Vice President Harris and to see her family representative of such a vast variety of individuals. And we are in a biracial marriage, we have biracial kids. That was just beautiful to see a picture of America that you don't always see. um, that being said, even though so much of it was encouraged, I think one of the key words that stick out to me is the word we. We need to. And I think that the danger is too often people look at political leaders as saying, oh, they're going to be the fix all. They're going to be, I can just, let them deal with it. And I think that for me, when I heard that it encouraged and inspired me to say, I need to make sure that I'm being engaged in the community in a way that makes a difference, and to not just sit back, and to know, to be actively engaged. And so whether it's doing what I do at church, or for the disability population, or for the community at large, I think that the key is that we need to take that. We can't put all of our eggs in the basket that our political leaders are going to solve all the problems. We all, as a community, as people of faith, need to step into that and take uh, notice of what is around us. And I think that in a sense, I feel like there is that permission in this hopeful speech today that could open that door. But I think it's also that we need to not just sit back, and to actively be engaged. And I was involved in a Bible study that I gave to some individuals today on Zoom, and it was in the book of James, and it was the main thing is to whatever you speak, you also do. And I think that that doing needs to be a big piece of how we go forward.
I love these multifaceted reflections. Thank you, Trudy. Kayla, you and I are probably the youngest members of this group. So why don't you represent us and share your thoughts?
Yeah, well, from a university standpoint, politics unfortunately do affect education in a large way, and I think that could be a concern for a lot of students. I am thankfully in my last semester at Jessup, but I that's a whole experience, and my education has been impacted by the decisions of the school and the political sway of people in charge there, leadership there, and how I've been treated as immunocompromised and Zoom student has been affected politically too. So it's interesting to see the reach of politics. I think that's why it's important as the church that we need to be aware of both sides. We need to be educated, but we also need to be willing to step into that and dialogue with each other and not have it be so hostile. And we need to step into that discomfort, because that's the point of following Jesus. If we just sit in our box backstage, that's not what we're called to do. And as a female, it's kind of exciting. It's definitely not the end, and it's, you know, I wouldn't measure it as the greatest accomplishment in life, but I think it's really cool that we have a female vice president. I think it's about time. And it's cool that it's also a Black female too. So that's something that I'm proud of. I think as a girl, you get told interestingly enough that you can't do this, or that's not really girly, or why are you doing this, or even within the church, something as simple as stacking chairs and helping clean after a service. You're told, well, we need big, strong men. Well, I'm strong too. So just from that perspective, it's really cool to see Kamala Harris step up and be vice president. I'm excited for what's to come, but that's not just political. That's not limited to Biden and Harris. I think it should be, our God does impossible things and he works miracles. And I think there's a lot to expect from this year and the future years. And I think that we have to step into this year in this new presidency with expectancy and like just a joy and a hope for what God is going to do, because he is ultimately the ruler, and he is who we follow. So like my dad said, we can't elevate any one person to a status above Jesus and act as though any one person can solve all problems. I think it is a coming together that needs to happen. I think that is, the hopefulness of the message of unity that is being shared with this new presidency. That does bring hope, because we do need unity. We need to step in together and kind of figure out what that means. But I think the church needs to be precedent in that. We need to set that precedent a little bit better, and that starts with conversation and dialogue.
Thank you very much, Kayla. Others?
I'd like to share just kind of my experience today. I think first, this is my first time being a part of this, so thank you. And I think I'm coming from a perspective of a husband and a father in a biracial home. And so, Trudy, what you shared, I think resonated with me just in the way that the inauguration today really had language that was more healing and hopeful. Really meant a lot for our family. I'm a pastor, and I am part of a church that's more conservative, and I'm starting a church that's trying to engage in our city, and our city's multi-ethnic, and I'm serving in the city. And so I feel like, and I've shared before too, Paul, just I feel like I get kind of caught in two different worlds. People that I love. In one world, when I was coming to this, a friend of mine was at our church, and I just asked, I was like, hey, I'm going to be a part of this conversation. And he comes from a conservative perspective. And I said, what are you afraid of? And he said, I'm afraid of everything. And I thought, I was thinking more of something specific, and I kind of chuckled because I think, what do you say? But he really meant it. And I have other friends that are thinking about moving. And I think it's the emotions and the reaction that, there's a real sense that some of my conservative friends feel like we lost today. And it's either we lost the battle, or on the other side, it's we lost our witness. And a friend of mine today was sharing how, being a pastor in Seattle, it's like people assume that we approve of the riots, and that's taken our voice. And so I think that's on one side, but I think for us, as we talk through this, it's like, how do we build bridges when it feels like bridges have been burned down? And another friend sent me and it's where it gets tricky. He sent me an email sharing about an author who's coming out with a book saying that boldness is burning bridges to our security or our secure places. And I think, why do we have to use that language of burning bridges? I just think the whole metaphor is unhelpful. It doesn't cause me to want to enter into these conversations if it's the starting point is that to be bold is to burn bridges. So I think I'm kind of stuck in between worlds where, I share the sentiment that, it feels like there's a relief with my friends that come from a more progressive perspective, that I feel with my family, the conversation at home won't be so hostile in the sense of what we're hearing, like the conversation about race and the concerns that's been in our home. So I just kind of don't know how to build bridges when it feels like people are kind of done.
And, Phil, what you were saying too, that you feel like you're caught between two worlds or torn. I would hope that we always feel like that. There's a sense in which if we're really inhabiting the world in which we live, we are inhabiting worlds. Back to the point that Jeremy was making, there are these various narratives. People see the same event and interpret it differently. They've seen the same event as Cliff sees, and they don't see it, or Kayla, what she sees, and they don't see it. I remember a conservative, very conservative white pastor who did not vote for President Obama, but he said when he saw the tears on people's faces and they were just so rejoicing that there was an African-American president, it touched him. And even though he didn't share the policies, he said there's something striking there. And I appreciated how he was able to move across in his heart to appreciate what they were appreciating, even though he didn't share the policies and was strong in his convictions. But we have to be ambidextrous. And I think you are being ambidextrous in how you're engaging. I think we'll never, if we're doing it right, we'll never try and pull out. We need to have these various communities we're connected with. Maybe you don't agree with me, any of you, but I'll just mute you if you don't agree with me, or I'll burn bridges with you if you don't agree with me.
Mute him, mute him, mute him.
Could you kind of help me think through this? So I was talking to some of my friends on the more conservative side, and
yeah.
But just thinking through, the sentiment I get is that we've gone more extreme, that's where we're headed. So that creates a lot of uncertainty and fear. And I've read that, a lot of the initiatives that were set forth today it's almost like the headline is about what's against Trump. Like, it's not about the actual initiative, it's more about what it's replacing. And I feel like that's what makes it hard in this space, because it's like, if the fear is that it's more extreme, I mean, how do we bring people together that feel like you're moving away?
Well, and if people remember 4 years ago, I heard, because every administration that's replacing, they tend to want to replace what their predecessors did. And I remember, and again, I'm not trying to be an offense, but it's an equal opportunity offense. He was very intentional, I think, on turning over some of President Obama's, many of his policies, and people felt we were going extreme the other way. And so I just think we have to constantly try and think through, as hard as it is, how do those on the other side feel? Whatever that side is. It's not all cats are gray, it's all relative. It's not say change our convictions and be wishy-washy, but I can hold firmly to my convictions and still step into someone else's shoes and try and understand life. And if we can do that, we're making some headway. And it's got to start with me, wherever I am on it. I have to try, and with you and with others. So good points, Phil, good points. Heather, Tony, I think you haven't shared yet.
I actually didn't watch any of the stuff today, and I love politics, but over the last year, I've kind of put it on the back burner. And the thing that I kept thinking about this whole week is that Jesus is still on his throne. He doesn't ever change administrations. He's still sovereign. And so I feel like I need to anchor myself in that, because when I'm talking to people who have fears on both sides, for me, that's the place I feel like I just have to keep coming back to, is that Jesus is on his throne, and how do we live that out and love one another? So listen to the impact of things on one another, and at the same time, really cultivate that unity in Christ, because that's what we have to do. I think too, I was hearing Kayla and Trudy talk about having a woman in the White House, and I don't know that that's impacted me. And I've heard so many people say that, and I'm like, why? Like, and part of me, I think it's this. I think because I have seen so many capable women serving in different areas that I'm like, well, of course. Like, do you know what I'm saying? But that's just where it landed for me. It may have been different at a different time, a different place. But it also made me realize we need competent leaders, a variety of competent leaders serving in our local churches, in our local communities, so that people have a connection to seeing leadership done well. And it's not just all the top pinnacle positions, those are important, but so that people also can look and say, oh, I relate to this woman that I know, or I relate to this man that I know, or this person looks like me and leads well, and I know them. And so for me, that's where my heart has been, is how do I live this out on a more local level? Because I think that's where more change happens, is how do I love my neighbor next door? How do I love, I don't know, the people in my church? And my church is interesting because I've just been there about 2.5 years, and there's a variety of political bumper stickers in the parking lot, but our pastors really don't do politics from the pulpit. And it's been just an interesting thing for me to observe and watch. And it's been beautiful because I feel like, wow, people with differing views feel at home. And I think in part because they've done a good job of keeping the gospel the main thing. But it does get tricky because then there's times where people want to pin you down. If you're in leadership, they want to know, how you vote or how you do it. And that can be a little bit tough because we're full people and we have our opinions. At the same time, for me, I'm realizing I'm like, some of those opinions, they just don't, for me, matter as much as they have in years past, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Heather. A lot of good thoughts there, and much we could build upon. Tony.
I would hope that we could take seriously what Pastor Cliff said, that even though we've transitioned from one administration to another, Pastor Cliff is still very aware of the danger that's posed to his life as an African-American man, and to his congregants and members of his communities. I worry that we continue to domesticate the message of Dr. King. When Dr. King says the greatest threat to the flourishing of his brothers and sisters, of Black Americans, is not the Ku Klux Klan, but the white moderates, I wonder if we are centering the conversation of progress around white comfortability and not the very dangers posed to our Black brothers and sisters. As much as it's been told to us previously for the past 4 years that it won't be bad, President Trump will be a just president and he'll govern fairly, that President Trump is not racist, we still have such a short-sighted view of systemic racism, because just this past summer, the names of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and Ahmaud Arbery were on our lips. And still now, I find it very difficult to relish in any sort of joy or hope when it feels very much like an illusion. Because when we talk about building bridges, I wonder if bridges built for the comfortability of white moderates aren't built on top of the bodies of Black and brown brothers and sisters. And so as relieved as I feel to switch from one presidency, from one administration to another, I would be remorseful if I did not highlight what Pastor Cliff has just said, that he still feels that danger. If I did not highlight that over the summer, we shouted with so much gusto the names of Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd, but we still have not made any progress. I wonder if we continue to push towards a sort of equal representation, who do we leave behind? The voices of people who are unheard, the voices of the marginalized and the oppressed. And so while I think from a very privileged position, I feel relieved, I also feel very, very burdened by the fact that there still is not justice for our Black brothers and sisters. There's still not safety in any conversation around moderation or building bridges. I wonder who we are still keeping out of those conversations and how those conversations only benefit a select few. I don't want to continue the domestication of Dr. King's message, of his gospel conviction. I truly want to live into a beloved community, but I really believe it begins with a true interrogation of the systems and the structures that keep us apart and that benefit some and oppress others. It isn't my heart to condemn anyone. It's my heart to say, I hope we hear what Pastor Cliff said, that even through the transition to a Biden administration, Black brothers and sisters are still in danger.
So, Tony, something you said, a couple of things you said that I want to highlight as we proceed. You asked a question, who is being left out in the midst of it all? Who is being left out? That we should never lose sight of who's left out. You know, it was interesting in Dr. King's sermon on the Vietnam War. He lost a lot of traction. The last 3 years of his life were years of great hardship for him. His popularity went way down. And in part, it was his sermon on the Vietnam War. He saw it as a great evil with militarism, economic exploitation, and racism. And people, even in his own movement, were upset, and many American journalists, politicians were upset that he was taking that on. And he said, how can I not be concerned for brown people overseas as well as brown people here? So he was always thinking about other people who's often not heard. Interestingly enough, Dr. John Perkins, who's been a big impact on New Wine, said, I wish I had done more for white Appalachian leaders. And I think Dr. King was very much concerned for people of various backgrounds, but who's being left out? And we have to ask that. And also something you said, I think well worth future consideration, people will call for unity. And sometimes we can use unity as a hammer to shut down any kind of difference. And it should always be about diverse unity and equitable unity, not just unity. Unity is often used by those in power to shut down any kind of conversation with a call for equity and justice. And so I just want to highlight that. There's so many facets to where we're going with this conversation today, but I just could not but highlight those points you made that we need to account for. Much more could be said. It's not moving on from this, it's moving further into it is where we're going. What happens if we don't get what we want? What happens when I don't get what I want? I'm a white guy. And I have my concerns and angst as a white guy. And I have to ask myself, what do I do if I don't get what I want? How did Peter operate when he didn't get what he wanted? And those are questions that hopefully throw me back on Christ. And I think this is further to what Heather was saying. I think often our problems are deeply spiritual problems. And I think so often my insecurities reflect how I'm not really pressing into Christ. I think I think there are a lot of areas of lordship that I haven't dealt with yet. And so I'm just speaking for myself here. I haven't said anything other than this. What happens if I don't get what I want in our society? How am I going to react? How am I going to respond? Will I burn bridges? And I'd like us to think about that. Jesus had his disciples around him every night. He had Simon the Zealot. He had Matthew the tax collector. It's like, I want to choose those guys to be part of my group, because it's like Simon the Zealot's going to slit Matthew the tax collector's throat any chance he gets. But Jesus really pushed that. But none of them got exactly what they wanted, but they got more than what they could ever imagine. And I think we settle for so little when God calls us so much more. But I'm asking myself, what happens if I don't get what I want in this conversation? What if I don't get what I want in this relationship, or in this 4 years, or in the next 2 months? How am I going to respond or react? That, to me, is a question I would ask all of you. Do you think about those? And I mean, it was one of the questions today, but how do you respond to that? Just briefly, a few of you, because we only have till midnight tonight to finish this marathon race. So thoughts?
I'd just like to say, Paul, that's a real interesting question. And the reason I say that is because I think it has to do with our perspective of what do we want. And when I think about what do I want, one of the things I want unity. I want love. I want acceptance. I want understanding. And when I don't get that, then that's concerning to me. I don't know about anyone else, but when I saw what happened on January 6th, I was horrified. Not only to the fact that the Capitol had been overrun, but what was behind it all. And then when I saw the Confederate flag, and then I saw the signs of Jesus, those things really concerned me. And I think sometimes we are so inward focused. And what I want is, I want everybody to, instead of being inward focused about what I want, I want to get what I can get, but be more outward focused, because I think that's where love is. When I hear people talk about Jesus, my question is, what Jesus are you talking about? And my mind immediately goes to the picture of the white Jesus. And so I have to really question when I ask myself that question, what do I want? I want someone to understand that when I say Black Lives Matter, that does not mean white lives do not matter. It means I want you to see me as a valuable person as well. So I'm really asking that question, what is it that we want in this? And I think that by being more outward focused, we will bring a better understanding. The things that seem to be dividing us and pushing us further apart, when we seek to be outward focused, I think it will bring about a relationship. We'll begin to understand the depth of where a person is, where instead of us fearing that person, I think we'll learn to love that person.
Cliff, you had said that which Jesus, right? Which Jesus do people have in mind? I think that's $1 million question. Which Jesus, the inward oriented Jesus or the outward oriented Jesus, right? And Jesus often saved his hardest words for the insiders, the establishment. And I happen to be one of those figures as religious leader. But he was always turned toward people on the fringes, on the outside.
Mhm.
So which Jesus are we operating from? The insider Jesus or the outsider Jesus? The one who's going out or the one who's going in? I mean, I think that's a live question for anyone. And it's not like, oh, therefore we know the answer there. Jesus surprises us left and right, right and left on these matters.
I think though, I mean, we do. See, my question is not what if I get what I want? I mean,
No,
for
my
the
question is, Matt, what happens if you don't get what I want?
that's the problem, right? And what if, so for instance, and look, I know this can be taken in so many different directions, and so take it however you want. What if the Black Lives Matter gets what they want, and a lot of them want power, and then we flip the switch, and so the one group that's crying out for equality and equity then gets what they want though, and a lot of the folks want power, and you get that, and it doesn't change. Same thing with the people who wanted Biden is president. What if you get what you want, and then now in whether it's from God or whether it's from it brings me back to the scene in God's Not Dead, where the mom finally speaks and she says sometimes Satan gives the people what they want so that they don't question anymore. And so my thing is again, it's a dual, because my fear is we have, we don't want Jesus, because what did Jesus become? He became sin. What if we became what Jesus did for the sake of the other? It meant that, like, if I vehemently disagree with the folks that stormed the Capitol, if I want to be Jesus to them, I have to step into their skin so much so that I become drenched in everything that they believe so as to understand them. Rob Zombie has a song that says more human than human. Well, people will not listen to him from the Christian standpoint because he doesn't believe in Jesus. But what if, isn't that what Jesus did? He stepped into what it meant to be so human that he became sin. Well, that's not the Jesus that I think people would say that they want if Cliff asked them, what Jesus do you want? Because that means that I have to become everything that I hate. And so when Tony's saying we need to listen to what Pastor Cliff is saying, I'm saying, yeah, but I don't want to listen. I'll listen to what each one of you is saying. I don't want to listen to what Jesus is saying, because Jesus is telling me, dude, it doesn't matter if you're swing right politically or left politically. The question is who do you say I am? And before I answer that, he reminds me, dude, remember, I became sin. I became the piece of like everything that you step on. And I'm asking you then to gladly embrace that and become sin for this, to where you're willing, what Paul says, I will give up my place in heaven so that you, who are a piece of shit that were stepping on everything, but I'm willing to give my salvation away for you. That's the question that I think, like, that's what scares me. That's what scares me is like, I think I think it's great to have these talks. Joe Biden's not my hope. The left message is not my hope, nor is the religious right my hope. And yet we come and we say, ooh, there's a new regime in town and they're going to be the hope. Well, if I come from their perspective, middle class hope is only hope for those who are in that economics. This hope is only the hope for those socially constructed group that I'm offering it to. Well, the only hope that's universal is Jesus. And whoa, I don't know if I would love, I have tattoos that say I love Jesus. Okay. And I'll wear the shirts and I'll do that stuff. And I got a doctorate in theology. And I don't know though, if he came to me and said, are you really willing, Matt, to let go where you lose your identity so that this person who you think is the biggest piece of can spend eternity with me and you can't? That's what he did for me. He became sin for my sake. And Paul said, I'm willing to go that step and become sin so that my brothers and sisters, that's the question I'm scared of. What if I did get what I want? I feel like I get what I want every day. That's too much of me and not enough of him.
We sang a song on Sunday, and it's called Brother, and the lyrics are when I look at my enemy, I see my brother. And that's it also goes back to, the two greatest commandments, love the Lord, but love your neighbor. There's no mention of enemy. And I think that we don't have that concept nailed down, because it is scary and it is hard, and it's uncomfortable, and we want what we want, and there is that human selfishness. I don't want to get trampled on. I don't want to be, nothing. I want to be something. I want to be, but so the concept of not having enemies, or letting these people, like, I have people I don't like. And loving them so much, that I would give my life and give up my place, not just give my life, because if I die, I know I'm going to heaven, right? Maybe, hopefully. But to sacrifice that. And I don't even think that we can really process that. But as soon as we start to step into that and sit in that, I think then maybe we can get just a little glimpse, a little taste of how much God really does love us, and how deep and crazy insane that love is. And that, yeah, politics are politics, and school is school, and wherever we are, our perspective, we're never going to have another perspective other than our own. And so we need to start stepping into the going further than our own perspective, and trying to even fathom the perspective that Jesus has of us, where, he came down and humbled himself. And I don't think that we sit with the cross and the brutality of that, and the suffering and the dirtiness of this world enough.
Can I jump into the mix a little bit and just riff off of what you guys are talking about? Maybe I guess I sense a little bit of a tension in what we're talking about. And I think that, I think the challenge is, how do you take truths that we can all nod to in a certain sense, but what we're really trying to aim at is embodied practical reality. What does that look like, right? So for example, and most people, like, we could agree with Paul that probably there's too much cancel culture out there. At the same time, I would probably want to challenge some, particularly members probably on the right, to say, Jesus, you might call, some of you might call what some of the stuff that Jesus did as cancel culture, right? When he, and that was not unloving, right? That if he is the embodiment of love, for him to call some certain people a brood of vipers, that's not insulting them. That's just kind of accurately mirroring back to them who they were, as actually a way of inviting them into his shalom, right? Into his way of peace. And so I guess what I'm trying to thread the needle between kind of in some ways integrating what I'm hearing, and I definitely agreeing with what Tony is saying and riffing off of Cliff, and then what Matt is saying and his daughter, as well as some of what Paul is saying. I guess a tension I'm feeling is maybe, and this is maybe speaking to the left, I think sometimes I see a strong emphasis on, when you're oppressed, it's all about self-care. And I agree to an extent. And, I'm someone that believes in reparations for Black people, right? So just throw that out there. That's where I am at, right? But for me, I sometimes want to challenge those who, I identify as like center left, maybe, right? Depending on who we're talking to, right? How they view the spectrums. But I sometimes worry that we view the act of, I love that song, by the way, Kayla. When I look in the eyes of my enemy, I see my brother. But we view the act of listening to something that you can perceive as a, and perhaps is ideologically, against me, just like, this is like oppressive to me. And view that as, emphasize self-care. So just keep that stuff away from you. And I think I would challenge that a little bit. I would say, I think about the discipline of listening. It's not enabling someone to oppress you by listening to people. And so I think that sometimes we have become a little absolutist in our categories or our imagination for how we engage people, and what love can look like. And I think listening, and I love what you said, Matt, and this is where I'm trying to agree with you, listening to be able to even think their thoughts after them. I've been trying to do that with a family member who I would view as much farther right. I actually conceive of them as in conspiracy thinking territory, which I view as unhealthy, you know, and but be able to think their thoughts after them, to be able to fairly resonate, reflect back to them and say, is this how you see things? And if things really were this way, I can see why I would probably feel just as alarmed as you would, right? That kind of thing. And to be able to be in that place and to be at peace. And, you know, maybe we need to learn from our Buddhist friends or Stoic friends, right? To be able to be at peace in that space. I think as a spiritual discipline that we need to learn, and of course, knowing our limits. We're not called to do that for everybody. I'm not called to understand every single person, but, you know, for people that I have some sense of agency or some sense of potential relationship for mutual influence. And this hits on what you want to talk about, Paul, when it comes to how this relates to our relationships with others that see it very differently and whose hopes may be dashed, where ours may be, you know. For those where I'm in a relationship where I have mutual influence, right? I think that I want to challenge us that we may too easily cancel or cut off using language that in our world we can agree with. So for the left, it might be self-care, right? You know, I probably don't know the right's language well enough to even tell you what they would use to justify that, right? And I think that the self-denial of love remains a duty for the oppressed. I think that that's something that I always stay with. And I think that isn't a burden. I believe that actually the supernatural power of the Spirit fuels the oppressed to get to love their enemies. And I think that that's the witness that we see. I mean, especially in the Black church, right? That's why the Black church tradition is so powerful, when you see a kind of love for enemies that yeah, it's just radical. So anyways, I'm rambling a lot, but I was just trying to do a little bit of integrating with what people were saying, agreeing with everybody, but also pushing back on everybody a little bit.
Matt, what you said was so powerful, because it just brings us right back to the cross, and in a super uncomfortable way. And I think that's healthy. And then what I just keep thinking of, Tony, is where you said, who's being left behind? And I was thinking about when I'm out hiking and I've got my phone and I lose the signal and I'm holding it up trying to find the signal. And I feel like we need to be those people that are like, have our beacon up and saying, who's being left behind? Who's just be so tuned into who is being left behind, who is making themselves small, and how do we connect with them, find out who did God make this person to be, and how do I build them up in that. So that's just what I was thinking of, Tony, as you talked about that. And what I heard from you, Cliff, is you're saying you feel that you can move ahead with some hope, feeling that there's hopefully some protection and safety, barring what we saw on the 6th, like you mentioned. And I think that for us to celebrate that with you and to continue, keep searching for that beacon, who's being left behind? Who's being left behind? Who do we support? Who do we come alongside?
I'm grateful to Dr. Farlow for saying that Dr. Metzger would give up his salvation on my behalf. I didn't know that Matt was
I
didn't know that Matt was quoting the Apostle Paul. I thought he was quoting Dr. Paul Metzger. I will say, Matt always challenges me, because I agree. Would I be willing to place myself in a position of not just engagement, but understanding and an embodiment of the beloved community with somebody who believes in QAnon and the like? I think to temper that also with what Jeremy has been sharing, I wonder to what extent do we call that the privilege of believing in conspiracy, though? The privilege of living in delusion, the privilege of choosing persecution rather than accurately perceiving persecution. Because I think we come back to Dr. King's legacy. We think of Dr. King as this marble statue at the Capitol, but Dr. King's last moment was a body torn apart on top of a staircase at a hotel. Dr. King's legacy, what Dr. King wanted, he didn't get. And I think for us, it's a great privilege to be able to ask, what if we get what we want? What if we don't get what we want? I don't think Dr. King was ever afforded that privilege. And so while I wish I had the courage and the Christ-likeness to pursue people who felt inclined to believe in QAnon and a certain ideology of persecution, I am haunted by Dr. King's legacy that keeps me grounded in maybe my own delusion and my own persecution mentality. And so I guess what I'll end with saying is I want justice for Breonna Taylor. I want justice for Breonna Taylor. I think until we can address that injustice, President Biden's administration doesn't really mean much. And the following presidencies after him don't really mean much unless we can answer, does Dr. King's legacy matter? Will Breonna Taylor get justice? Will George Floyd get justice? That's what I want.
Thank you. CJ and Phil and CJ. And then we're going to have some closing thoughts on the question, how can we make sure that Jesus and his kingdom shape our expectations, hopes, and fears? And what difference might that make in the coming days, weeks, and years in very concrete ways, whether it's, as we bring his reality to bear in our book clubs or in our conversations or in any of our hopes, whatever they might be on the ones that you've just noted. But anything that you wanted to share about what happens if we do or don't get what we want, Phil and CJ?
Yeah, I'll just want to say thanks, Tony, for your comments and bringing attention to what Cliff said earlier. And I'm thinking about where I'm coming from and what I want, and hearing what you guys have shared, what you want. I think I'm now asking the question, what happens if Cliff doesn't get what he wants when I'm already thinking about what I don't get? And you said, Paul, about how we settle for so little, and Cliff, you said that, if you move from the inward to the outward, that's where love is. If I'm focusing on what I don't get and I'm only focused on my needs, then I'm totally missing out on what other people are wanting. And that's where love is. And it might be that I'm needing this kind of conversation just to realize what true repentance really is. It's not what matters to the needs that I'm missing. It's about what other people are calling me to see, just like you did, Tony. So I just appreciate just this conversation, because I think change does start with repentance, and that's my heart, and so I appreciate what you guys have shared, and I think this is really challenging for me, and what you called us to, Matt, is a higher love that is really uncomfortable. It's in some ways really simple, but really difficult.
I just feel like this conversation is like, I started out by saying these ideas of hope and unity and building bridges and whatnot. I was inundated by all of the bridges needing built, I guess. And in this conversation, we're seeing that there's, I mean, I don't know if you guys are seeing this. I'm seeing there's lots more in this room, like this group of people. Like there's lots of bridges and whatnot to build, and lots of wants that, like Phil was just saying, like I don't even want to say what I want. I want to know what you want and what you need, and I want Cliff to feel safe, and I want Tony's sense of justice. Like that, I want those things as well. And these the question I have, I guess, is again, like how do we have these conversations and have these dialogues? And I think in this, I am excited as I was hearing this, when Matt brought up Paul and his, not Paul Metzger. We all know that. I mean, you have to have salvation to give up before you can, give it up for somebody else. Anyway, the idea that this upside down crazy, I mean, that statement has always like haunted me. Like that's not the kind of faith that I have. Like I want that. I really do. I want to love others to such a degree that eternity with God is something I would give up for their sake. Dude, I am so far off from that. Like it's insane. But that's that upside down nature of the kingdom. Like, I think that's the crazy part. And I think if we live into this, if like as God's people, we seek to really pursue this in a very real way, then what happens is the marginalized becomes the model, because they've done this work. They've done it for so long, and we elevate them and we stop asking, what do I want, to asking, what do you want? And how do we live like you? You're the model, you're the example. We talked about the Black church. We talked about, Phil Berlin, I know you guys know Phil, I think. One of his conferences, him and I were talking once, and it was years ago, but he talked about how he'd never buy his kids hoodie sweatshirts. And I have 3 boys, and they wear hoodies every day. And just, it punched me in the face. Like, I don't want to live in a world where my kids can wear hoodies. I want to live in a world where Phil's kids can wear hoodies, and it just, that outside, again, what Cliff was talking about, this other focus, this idea of living for a Jesus that we have such a love for others, to, like Matt talked about too, like that we are willing to give up everything that we have for the sake of the other. Privilege, position, political party,
And why would you want to do that? Why would
Why
you
would-
want to do that?
Why would I want to do that?
Yeah, why?
There's no motivation. Honestly, I don't. Like, I'm
No, seriously, because I
that's a
think
real
what we're
reality. I
after
don't. Like,
at New Wine is we are after the motivation. So I am asking you to bring the Bible to bear on that. Because again, if I don't have anything in the tank, I can't get there.
mhm.
We're thinking about Dr. King, one of my favorite stories of him, and we just honored his birthday this week, but was where he got that call about midnight, and they said, you're going to be dead. You've been given an opportunity, time's passed. And he said, I got a lot of death threats, but that one, I couldn't get back to sleep. So he goes downstairs, you see this at the King Museum, as a cutout scene, and he's just crying out to God. He says, I can't do this anymore. I do not have it in me to lead these people. We're not even talking about leading the people. We're just talking about ourselves, getting our eyes off ourselves, right? Wherever we're coming from,
Mhm.
get our eyes off ourselves and toward Christ and toward others. And God met him there. It was a powerful scene. And he said, you are never alone. You are never alone. You are never, ever, ever alone. So God met him there. And so I think with all the fears, an imperfect love is cast out by fear, but a perfect love casts out fear. When the American church is captured by fear, not a holy fear of God, and we all have fears and illegitimate fears, or fears that overwhelm the love. But I know where you're coming from. I just want you to articulate it. What is it that is going to drive you toward that? The love of God in Christ compels us, Paul said.
Mhm.
That's what, it wasn't something he generated himself to say, I'd rather be a curse for my people in Romans and for others, but it was the love of Christ. So how is that shaping you to move past ourselves, If you could speak to that, CJ.
How would the love of God move me past? Is that what you're saying? How would I
Move you
embrace-
into this, because it cannot be self-generated. And King
Absolutely.
didn't have it. He did not have it. He cried out to God. God met him there.
Agreed.
A
And I think
lot of humanist scholars will think that King was just basically a civil rights. No, he was a Black Baptist pastor. He was a preacher.
Yeah.
And he prayed to God for mercy, and God met him there. So
Yeah.
that's what we need. We need
He's
prayer. We're
motivated
going
by
to
the
close in
gospel
prayer
and
today.
centrality of the kingdom. I think that's his focus, and I think that's I'm going to appeal to the same way the king did, is turn to the Lord and elevate the gospel and the reality of the kingdom and the daily to bear on the day-to-day actions that as we encounter these. And I think that's a day by day, moment by moment. For me, it's honestly a humbling and repentant stature, like Matt talked about, to recognize our place. Which, if I were to speak just about our culture in general right now, it seems like there's some confusion. We can't agree upon the Jesus that we're following. We can't agree upon the what it means to be an evangelical. What does it mean to be a Christian or a follower of Jesus or a disciple? Like, these are all loaded words that have come with different meanings. And there's a lot of, I do it every day where I think I have a grasp on this Jesus, and to walk in that more humbly though, and more focused on the Lord and recognizing what he's done for me. Letting the gospel, when we talk about gospel centrality, oftentimes we talk about that as we have something that we're taking to others instead of letting it bear on ourselves. But
I think, yeah, no, I think, CJ, I think exactly what you're saying, that in the difference too is in Nouwen talks about this, the difference between hope and optimism. And I was talking to Paul about this earlier. Some have cynicism, some have optimism, but we need realism. We don't need an abundance of one or the other. We need in the realism for the Christian is bound up in hope. It's not optimistic, it's not wishful thinking. Nouwen says, because hope is a person. And this is the trouble that I always wrestle with, is because I think it's great. We can all say I need to be more Jesus, and the way I do it. But for me, at least, this is because of my background of being a wrestler. The way that I grew from wrestling was when I got my butt kicked. I would go into the room and I would find the guy that was the best dude at my weight, and I would just roll around with them and just get crushed. Why? Because it made me better the next time when I wrestled someone else. Well, same thing with like the love. So I wish I could say, ooh, you know what compels me and pushes me is the joyful feeling and the fuzzy wuzzies and all that kind of cuddly stuff. But so often it's not. It's this inward, like this, just like, it makes me sometimes want to throw up. I just wrestle so much within, because I'm like, I know that loving Jesus is what I'm made for. It is the hardest thing for me to do, and yet it's the one thing that I want the most of. But I wrestle with it because it's the one thing I repel the most against. And so I am so much within. And so I love the fact that, like what you're saying, Phil, and what you said, what everyone is saying is that, like, I need to understand, to see from the other perspective. And in doing that, I though need to be as honest with myself. Descartes said that he came up with this evil genius to whether or not God was. For me, I don't need to come up with anything. I know that I'm that evil genius that wants me to doubt the truth of God's goodness every single day. And yet all I need is to hang around people like you, where I'm like, dude, but you're legit. And then I say that to you and you go, but I'm not. I'm a piece of you. You tell me exactly what I think about myself. And then you embrace me with that, though, because you don't condemn me. And that, to me, is the relational truth that breaks through for me. And maybe I'm saying that from a position of privilege. And if it is, it's because I've been so overloved. And so then what I want to do then is, in that privilege of being loved, take that and somehow pour it out to the people. And when it's someone who I just cringe, Tony, I agree with you. You know what I do though? And again, this is, maybe it's just, I know that that's where I have to be when I am and I'm not saying that I do it. Okay. I do it in my head first so much. Okay. I am the greatest of all Christians inside my own head. Okay. The reality is putting it into action. But the dialogue for me helps because it draws me into your own dilemma. And then we can see, though, the failures that the world says you suck at loving. I go, I know. And yet Jesus picks me up all the more. It doesn't make sense to me. And people are like, and I say, I can't explain it. So just do this life with me. Theologically, I can't. We become so much more psychological Christians than theological Christians. It's easy to throw the labels on it and think about this. Like, the theological is the incarnation. That to me is like embodying love. Oh,
We're near the end of our time. Jeremy, were you going to say something there? I didn't want to cut you off. I thought you were going to.
Yeah, I was just going to reiterate maybe
Yes.
what Matt's saying in terms of action. I think I think we all know the ideologies, even ones that we agree more with. You really can't share an ideology or share a way of seeing things through language very well. But if people can be broken out of their way of seeing when they see, when they're invited through recognizing, yeah, you're embodying a radically different way of life. So, I think it's important to have roundtable kinds of conversations like this, and then it's important to do it to down to the level of how do you spend your money, where do you live, who do you connect with, how do you spend your time. So,
and I think with that, Jeremy, that so let's say we come out of this conversation, we get into conversations, people where the fears, the angst, all that, and it can really eat us up. Again, where we get exhausted, we get torn apart. I think we have to go back to Christ. We have to go back to those who help re-energize us, to go right back into it and not lick our wounds so much, but to stay in it, because it's so exhausting to stay in the kinds of conversations where we're constantly being pulled by people in different worlds. But we have to stay in it. Jesus never pulled out of it. And how can we, as God breaks our hearts and breaks us, so that we are more, better vessels for Christ to speak through, and for the Spirit to move through, for the Father. So I appreciate that closing point and the various points that have been made. I would just like us to close in prayer, and not in some kind of like, and I know none of us would seek to do this, but like we have another like cultural, political point to make, that we're trying to get through to the readers, but really like just to cry out to God, I mean, I need God. And I want my hope to be in Christ, that it would just so shape how I engage others. But Heather, could you open us, and Cliff, could you close us in a few minutes? Would that be okay?
Sure.
Then as others, feel free to pray.
Yeah. Dear God, I just thank you so much for my brothers and sisters here. I thank you that we share a unity in you. I thank you for this opportunity to sit and to hear different stories and where people are coming from, and the things that make their heart hurt and the things that make their heart rejoice. I just praise you and thank you that we can do that. I pray for those who are watching and listening, that they would be encouraged and pointed towards you, and also pointed towards loving their neighbor in a deeper, more practical way.
yeah, Lord, just show us individually by your Spirit where you are calling us to direct our energies in the way of restoring what is broken, in pursuing what is just, and we need that kind of wisdom, and you give that to us abundantly by your Spirit, because to all those who ask.
Lord Jesus, everything you do was motivated for love, with love, and with a deep love for those even who persecuted you. And I just, I pray that we could have that kind of a view. Lord, I pray that you change my heart to be able to love those who are difficult to love. And more than that, Father, to love those who I'm quick to maybe accidentally even like ignore or forget or dismiss, because my story isn't their story, because I get to live in privilege in one way or another. Father, I open my eyes and help me to see. Help me to be able to love well like you love well. My conversations to be laden with your kind of love, to remind me of your love for me, and for me to be able to be changed and transformed, to be able to love even those who I would consider my enemies, people I would like to cancel or be quick to dismiss. Change my heart, Father. Help me to become increasingly more aware of the stories that the people I interact with every day go through, and help me to be able to listen more, to speak less, Father, to love well.
God, I just thank you for this time that I learned a lot about even just where my heart's at. And God, may I not just cry out from my soul for myself. May I cry out for those when I hear their hearts. And God, just change me, and may it move into action, not just words. Lord, moving from inward to outward, and to be where love is. Lord, may that be the place that I focus my attention and my heart.
Lord Jesus, we thank you for this time tonight and the things that we've learned, the things that we've heard, the conversations. And we pray that your name would be hallowed by what we have done and said, that others will be blessed. And as we model, Jesus, what you have modeled for us, and that is to give of yourself. And as we give of ourselves, that we'll not be afraid to be givers versus takers, but we'll freely give in love. And if we all give, nobody will be lacking. If we give the love and not be afraid to fully give of love, then everyone will be wealthy and rich with love. And we thank you again for this time, and bless us as we go, that we will go and model that love. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
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 Awesome. So thank you for all those who have joined us tonight. This is a conversation and a dialogue that's going on. And in fact, it pours into a lot of what New Wine is all about. And next month, because Inaugurated Expectations, Hopes, and Fears ties into how we are as a holistic body, our mental, our physical, and our spiritual health. And next month, February 26th and 27th, New Wine is going to be presenting a conference, Mental Health, Building Bridges, Not Walls. And so look for details on that, because this all ties into who we are holistically as a person. When we're called to love, we're called to love the Lord our God with the wholeness of who we are, so as to love ourselves in order to love our neighbors. And New Wine is continually pursuing that. And so stay tuned for some of you. For those of you who are interested, the details will be coming up on our website, as well as in Facebook, and we're inviting you right now. So that's February 26th and 27th, Friday night and Saturday morning. So thank you so very much already for those who are going to be thinking about that. We have a plan of a panel discussion the Friday night, and then Saturday we'll have breakout rooms, but there'll be more details. And because we are holistic, and New Wine wants that. And for those that joined us again, this is an ongoing dialogue. Next week, New Wine Table Talks will be at its normal time of Thursdays at 3. So be mindful of that. We'll send out announcements for that as well. And then also on our YouTube page, we have the ability for you to get into New Wine Table Talks, New Wine Tastings, and New Wine Uncorked, and the ways in which New Wine is actively seeking to pursue the kingdom through the ways in which the Lord our God is seeking to use each one of us. So thank you again for joining myself and the rest of my colleagues. It's been an awesome time just hanging out together as we pursue the one who became love and is love for our sake, so that we might be poured out for the sake of the other. So on behalf of my friends and my colleagues and my brothers and sisters, thanks again for joining us. May God bless you as we press into him to understand what it means to be loved by the one who created us. And so thank you again for joining us. As always, you know what? New Wine is building relational bridges in contemporary culture through Jesus. And that's all about you, and that's all about us. And so thank you for joining us. Until we see each other again on the flip side, have a good one.